Hello, everybody. Welcome to the University of Austin again. I know it's been a huge week, and I know that some of you now have been with us right from the very beginning of the week, where we had the 71st Secretary of the Treasury, Larry Summers, with us. We then had Peter Thiel for two fantastic lectures out of the four that he's giving here this week. But tonight is the night that we've all really been waiting for, because it's the first time since we opened as a university that we've been able to welcome as a guest speaker the great Ayaan Hirsi Ali into campus to give a keynote address. It's a very, very exciting night for us all here at UATX. Now, I've been speaking far too much this week already, so I thought for tonight's lecture in particular, it would be much nicer if we had one of our students do the introducing, the formal introducing tonight. So just after the keynote takes place tonight, Caterina Erlinger, who is the editor of the Austin Beacon, which is our student-founded newspaper here, is going to be interviewing Ayaan Hirsi Ali for that publication. So I thought it would be better for Caterina to come and give the introduction tonight. So Caterina grew up in Italy, but comes to us most recently from Utah as a member of our founding class. And I'd like you to welcome her to give the introduction tonight. Caterina.
Thank you, everybody. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a hero. She has dedicated her life to oppose the oppression of Muslim women, Islamic radicalism, and to preserve Western values. Her story introduced me to the shocking reality of genital mutilation, forced marriages, and extremism of the Islamic world she grew up in. Reading her biography showed me her journey of traversing two worlds, the Middle Eastern world of her childhood and the Western world of her adulthood, and the courage, resilience, and determination required to leave everything and start anew in a new world. Her journey is a reminder to us that our Western assumptions in civilization are not universal. They are special, and we should guard them and be proud of them. Her life is a reminder of what a society without freedom, without tolerance, and without dignity looks like. We can all learn to be stronger, more valiant protectors of our beliefs from Hirsi Ali's trials and triumphs. From being raised in an Islamic fundamentalist society to working in the highest institutions of the Western world. Ayaan Hirsi Ali was born in Mogadishu, Somalia in 1969. As she grew up, she embraced Islam and strove to live as a devout Muslim. In 1992, Hirsi Ali fled to the Netherlands to escape a forced marriage. There, she was given asylum and in time citizenship. She quickly learned Dutch and was able to study at the University of Leiden. From 2003 to 2006, Hirsi Ali served as an elected member of the Dutch Parliament. She then moved to the US and in 2007 funded the AAH Foundation to protect and defend the rights of women in the US from harmful traditional practices. Hirsi Ali is a fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, a senior fellow with the Future Diplomacy Project at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and the founder of Courage Media. She's the best-selling author of Infidel and Heretic, Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and privilege to welcome this woman of rare courage and insight into our polity here tonight. Please welcome Ayaan Hirsi Ali to UATX.
Thank you, Caterina. That was a great deal of flattery, and I appreciate it. I am here tonight to speak to you about the Islamist-driven anti-Semitism in the West. It's a pretty intense topic. And all I can say is, I'm really sorry that I didn't bring you something more cheerful. I'm going to start with an anecdote. A few weeks ago, I went to a hair salon in a small village in remote Britain. I say Britain because I'm constantly hiding where I am, but trust me, it's very remote and very small. My stylist was a white, middle-aged male with tattoos and punched earlobes. Like most stylists, he was making small talk. He was complaining about the high cost of living, as many people in Britain do these days. He said he had always voted Labour, but now regretted it as they were making things worse. The radio was on, playing music interrupted by a brief news bulletin. There was an update on Russia's war on Ukraine. My hairstylist said, "There you have it. It's the Rothschilds." I told him I didn't understand what he was trying to tell me, and he went into detail. The Rothschilds make their money from war, he said, and they control the world. When I gasped, "The whole world?" he said, "Yes, the World Economic Forum." And then he launched into another explanation of how Jews control the World Economic Forum and were instigators of the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, the bombing of small children in Gaza, and now Ukraine. The Rothschilds' greed, he said, was causing masses of people to leave their homes because of wars, and many of those victims of war are now here, making life harder for us. I was stunned. I had been following the uptick in antisemitism everywhere in the West, but away from my research and my laptop, and in the context of small talk at the hair salon, I had to acknowledge that anti-Semitism had gone mainstream. If you think I'm exaggerating, here are the statistics. Back to the laptop. Surveys in Europe show that 96% of European Jews have faced antisemitism, with 80% believing it has worsened over the past 5 years. Many report frequent harassment, primarily online and in public spaces. Following October 7, 2023, and the Gaza conflict, anti-Semitic incidents surged by 400% in countries like Austria, Sweden, and surprisingly, Denmark. Attacks on synagogues, cemeteries, and individuals have increased across nations like France, Germany, and in the UK. In Eastern Europe, far-right movements contribute to anti-Semitic rhetoric and violence. Every Jewish person I speak to, and especially in these surveys, say that there is a sense of impending doom. In the USA, is it any better? Yes. Following the October 7 attacks, anti-Semitic incidents in the US increased by over 200%. The ADL reported more than 10,000 incidents from October 2023 to September 2024. In 23 alone, there were 8,873 recorded anti-Semitic incidents. Anti-Semitism surged on college campuses by 500% and online. In America, around 69% of Jewish adults reported encountering anti-Semitism on social media, rising up to 83% among young Jewish adults. A January 2024 study found that 24% of Americans harbor extensive prejudices, with young generations showing higher rates. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this in America. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are not better. In Canada, hate crimes against Jews increased by 71% in 2023, accounting for 19% of all hate crimes and 70% of religiously motivated hate crimes. In Australia is a very large country geographically, but the population is relatively small. There were 2,000 cases reported of attacks, including arson in synagogues and schools. And in Australia, they find, and I think it's the same in other countries, these incidents span the ideological spectrum of far-right, far-left, and Islamist. In New Zealand, anti-Semitic hate crimes rose by 530% in 2022 and in 2023. Jews are disproportionately targeted, being up to 160 times more likely to face hate crimes than other groups. Schools have been a major site of anti-Semitism, with 80% of Jewish students experiencing prejudice since at least October 2023. I don't know how much on Islamism, how much knowledge on Islamism to assume among this group here tonight. I will address the clarification of Islamism versus regular Muslims during the Q&A, but in the interest of time, I want to move on. And before I move on, I want to give you a taste of the Islamist-driven hatred of Jews. Please play the video.
من حالة نفسية مضطربة لأنهم هم سارقون، هم معتدون، والسارق والمعتدي الذي أخذ مالا بغير حق أو أرضا بغير حق يظل في اضطراب نفسي واضطراب في وجداني أنه أخذ شيئا واعتدى عليه. هم يريدوا أن يثبتوا للعالم، أن يثبتوا للواقع الدولي والإقليمي أنهم أصحاب حق. هم جرثومة غريبة، جرثومة وميكروب لا مثيل له في الوجود. والله مش أنا الذي أقول، القرآن الكريم وصفهم بأنهم لا يوجد لهم مثيل. لتجدن أشد الناس عداوة للذين آمنوا اليهود. يهلك هيك قرفة ناس لا عندهم لا دين ولا مبدأ ولا ضمير ولا. أنا أستنكر ممن يؤمن بالتطبيع معهم، ممن يؤمن بالجلوس معهم، ممن يؤمن أن هؤلاء بشر. ليسوا بشر وليسوا أناس وليسوا لا بذوات دين ولا ضمير ولا أخلاق.
وإحنا كراهيتنا أو كرهنا لليهود من منطلق عقيدة. القرآن هو اللي بيدعونا أن احنا نكرههم وما نحبهمش.
لو أن اليهود تركوا لنا فلسطين خلاص يبقوا حبايبنا؟ لا طبعا، عمرهم ما هيبقوا حبايبنا إطلاقا. عقيدتك في اليهود: واحد أنهم كفار، اثنين أنهم أعداء. مش أعداء عشان يحتلوا فلسطين، وإنما هم أعداء ولو لم يحتلوا شيئا.
نحن نعادي يهود حتى ولو أعادوا إلينا فلسطين لأنهم كفار.
هؤلاء هم اليهود باختصار. وإن لنا عندهم نحن المسلمين لثأرا لا والله لن ينقضي إلا باستئصالهم بإذن الله تعالى، لأنهم حاولوا ابتداء قتل نبينا صلى الله عليه وسلم مرات.
أعداء المسلمين بعد إبليس هم اليهود. من الذي قال ذلك؟ الله.
How much of that did you catch? It's subtitled. I'll quote one of them, one of the gentlemen with the interesting garb on his head. His name is Abdallah Jarbu. He's the first guy you see, I think. He was the Hamas Deputy Minister of Religious Endowments. And here he's caught on Al-Aqsa television in Gaza. And this clip is from the 28th of February in 2010. And he says, it's a long quote. He says, the Jews suffer from a mental disorder because they are thieves and aggressors. A thief or an aggressor who took property or land develops a psychological disorder and pangs of conscience because he took something that was not his. They want to present themselves to the world as if they have rights, but in fact, they are foreign bacteria, a microbe unparalleled in the world. It's not me who says this. The Quran itself says that they have no parallel. You shall find the strongest men in enmity to the believers to be Jews. May he annihilate these filthy people who have neither religion nor conscience. I condemn whoever believes in normalizing relations with them, whoever supports sitting down with them, and whoever believes that they're human beings. End quote. That last line where he is saying he condemns the people who sit down with them, that is directed towards governments in Muslim-majority countries who, during the Arab Spring, were affected and who would consider, and now recently, since the Abraham Accords, have indeed normalized relations with them. So that, in a nutshell, I think gives you the distinction between Islamists and regular Muslims. Regular Muslims, and especially with Muslim governments, have adopted, the idea of the nation state and they're running governments. Then they may not be running these governments well. They may be tyrannical. They are not democratic. Some governments are better than others. I think the government of the UAE is, for instance, better than the government of Egypt in attending to the needs of their citizens. But generally speaking, their politics is not centered on Islamism. The Islamists are a modern political movement that came into existence after the fall of the Caliphate in 1924. The Caliphate, the Muslim Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire declined and fell and was abolished officially in 1924. And there was this split between the Muslim elites back then. What do we do about this decline and fall? And one group decided they wanted to westernize and form nation states, whereas the other group, most of them clerics, said, no way, we declined and fell because we distanced ourselves from the Prophet's actual mission, which was to spread Islam to the rest of the world. So we have to rebuild the individual, rebuild the family, rebuild society, rebuild the caliphate and revive it, and then carry on with the Prophet's mission. So basically that is what Islamism is. In Western societies, the campaigns to fight anti-Semitism that started right after the end of the Second World War were sustained, they were comprehensive, and they were very effective throughout the Cold War. My compliments go to the pioneers, the compilers, the curators, the funders, and tireless activists who envisioned a world with no anti-Semitism. Their slogan was never again, and it was hugely successful as this kind of open, all-consuming hatred of Jews disappeared from mainstream society. Of course, it lived on in the fringes of the far right, the neo-Nazi and white supremacist circles, and it also lived on in Russia and the former Soviet Union, and later on in the countries that joined Eastern Europe. But the national efforts of collective reckoning that was undertaken in Germany and other Western European countries, the memorialization of the Holocaust, the mandatory education in schools and universities, the collaborations with Yad Vashem in Israel and reparations, that was admirable and it was effective. However, on the issue of Jew hatred, things have changed, and they have changed in 5 major ways. The first is due to the mass transformative migration to the West that has been underway for decades. And with it came the Islamist-driven anti-Semitism, which was commonplace in Muslim countries. I'm invited to platforms to come and tell my story. 25 years ago, my story of growing up in Somalia, undergoing female genital mutilation, a forced marriage, and then fleeing to Europe and building a life in a small, homogeneous European country, that was seen as astonishing or exceptional to the Western audiences who were shielded from the world I was born and raised in my early 20s. But most of those audiences are no longer shielded from the third world. In some ways, we have become the third world. If you look at things like the civic tension in Europe and even in America, the polarization, the exposure of women and children to harm and exploitation, the poverty, the dislocation, whether voluntary or compelled, the religious fanaticism, war, or the threats of war, be it civil or a foreign invasion, all these things are now going on in France, in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Sweden, in Belgium, and in other places. So number one, it is immigration, invasive, transformative, and mostly Muslim. Second, the internet and new technologies have made it a lot easier to propagate anti-Semitism. The video I showed you now was on Twitter, for the Twitter X, formerly Twitter. For the millennial and Gen Z generations, modern technology has given them the opportunity to be both passive consumers of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and Israelophobia, and active participants as content creators. They can generate fresh content all the time, and it doesn't have to meet any standards of veracity. Paradoxically, the growing education levels of many Muslims in the West has actually accelerated the hatred for Jews and for Israel in particular. The democratization of information has unleashed the creativity, the imagination of many Muslims to devote untold hours of their time, paid and voluntary, to advancing the most disgusting, false, libelous, and horrific lies about Jews and Israel. They dusted off copies of the Nazi and European literature on antisemitism and reimagined it for our time. Today, when the narrative of colonialism is considered the greatest sin of human history, Israel is accused of being the ultimate colonial project. Third, the global Islamist project to revive the caliphate that was abolished in 1924 is now headquartered in the West. After the so-called Arab Spring, when one after the other of the autocratic Arab governments were toppled, this was around 2010, 2011, they were toppled by popular uprisings. Those Arab governments that survived the intended revolution understood the role Islamists played in inspiring and organizing the unrest. The grassroots Muslim Brotherhood, in particular, often secretly working with the Iranian government, was rightly seen as the culprit. In response, the Muslim Brotherhood and all other Islamist groups and individuals suspected of mutiny were banned, imprisoned, defunded, evicted by the Arab governments that either hosted them or tolerated them in the past. Many of those Islamists relocated to the West, where they found a warm welcome within the ranks of the existing Islamist bases. In Europe, and even in America now, we have extensive networks of mosques, Muslim schools, Islamic societies, public relations councils, student associations, law firms, political and policy networks, all working incrementally towards their stated goal of conquering the West through non-violent means, and of course, in the process, defaming Israel, Zionism, and reviving the anti-Semitism we all thought was defeated. Fourth, the Islamists capitalized on the creedal crisis underway in the West, the crisis of Christianity, the crisis of liberalism, and more so the progressive end of the liberal spectrum, where we now have an unholy alliance of progressives and Islamists openly colluding to dismantle Western structures and demonizing Jews. I recommend you read David L. Bernstein's book, Woke Antisemitism: How a Progressive Ideology Harms Jews. In America, the language of victimhood, developed by radical Marxists, supposedly to expose the oppression of Black American descendants of slavery, concepts such as systemic oppression, intersectionality, and the binary division of society into oppressors and oppressed was superimposed on American Jews. Jews are now whites, they're privileged, they're Zionists, and they're supporters of an oppressor colonial state. Hamas, on the other hand, in progressive circles, is a resistance movement bravely committed to fighting for the liberation of a beleaguered, colonized Palestinian people trapped in an open-air prison and subjected to systematic bombings in order to bring about their genocide. The Hamas rallies you saw on American and other Western campuses in the spring last year, and that continue often to this day, dressed up as pro-Palestinian protests, are the culmination of more than 2 or even maybe 3 decades of cultivation in education and media institutions in the West. Fifth, and finally, I want to touch on the great realignment underway in the West. The political and ideological landscape that used to be based on class and religion on a spectrum from left to right has become meaningless. Today, the prevailing division is one between those perceived to be the elites, that is, political elites, religious elites, economic elites, urban, bureaucratic, and the legacy media, versus the working and middle classes, the rural communities, those who attend the churches or synagogues and get their information from alternative sources. In America, it's President Trump and the MAGA movement he founded that is now a coalition of former prominent Democrats, whites, working class, middle and rural classes, Hispanics, Blacks, and a major chunk of women. The moderate Democrats are struggling to recapture their party from the progressives led by Bernie Sanders and the very colorful women that make up the squad. In Europe, the establishment parties on both the center-left and the center-right have lost the credibility they once had. Voters are going in droves to the populist parties. Some of these parties, as in France and Belgium, had anti-Semitic elements in the past, and may still do. But this has changed as I see more and more Jewish voters either considering or openly supporting them. Given these 5 elements of mass migration, the age of the internet, including AI, the headquartering of Islamism in the West, and the creedal crisis in the West, in particular of liberalism and the Great Realignment, I think we must reassess the existing strategies for fighting anti-Semitism. Strategies that were successful in the past, but are now obsolete or worse, counterproductive. What are we getting wrong? I think, number one, what we are getting wrong is we are underestimating the Islamists. The war on terror blinded us to the other methods of asymmetric warfare they apply, like subversion, like alliance building, like propaganda, like weaponizing victimhood and minority status. We've underestimated their weaponization of Muslim demographics, eternally waiting for that silent Muslim majority to stand up and reject Islamism openly. We've underestimated their conviction and devotion to their faith and the revival of the caliphate. And in fact, their most important commitment, which is this that they state so openly, the annihilation of the Jews. We've also underestimated how incredibly resourceful they are in raising money. They raise money from Qatar, they raise money through zakat and alms, they raise money through these generous welfare states that have welcomed them into the West. And we also underestimated and don't fully understand how other states support them. And I'm talking about the Islamists are supported, for instance, by the government of Turkey. Turkey is a member of NATO, by the government of Qatar, and that Qatar has presented itself to us as a mediator of sorts, but is in fact colluding with the Islamists. What are we getting wrong? We're also getting wrong, and this again is part of that creedal crisis, is that the Judeo-Christian foundations, I think what we did was we threw the baby out with the bathwater. We thought we were going to shear Christianity of its sharp edges, but in fact, we threw the whole thing out, and I think we are living to regret it. Another baby that was thrown out with the bathwater is the nation state. Concepts like cultural pluralism, multiculturalism, and other progressive ideas masquerading as protections for minorities have had a corrosive effect on national identity and especially on social cohesion. We underestimated the rise of wokeism, social justice warriors' capture of the institutions of education has been catastrophic here in America, and it is even worse in Europe, if possible. What should we do now to fight this resurgence of the oldest hatred in humanity? I want to end with a statement attributed to the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He said that anti-Semitism is often a symptom of a national crisis, explaining that anti-Semitism frequently emerges as a warning sign of deeper dysfunction within a society, particularly during times of crisis. He argued that societies facing economic, political, or social instability often channel their anxieties and frustrations into scapegoating Jews, using them as a convenient target for blame. He reminded us that the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. Today's anti-Semitism is not just a symptom of a national crisis. It is a symptom of a civilizational crisis. And what we need to do is to draw the proper lessons from the history that led to the Holocaust. If we fail to do this, I fear that it's not just the Jews who will be led to their slaughter. And now I want to open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I'm Emma. You talk about how we've cleared or softened Christianity of its hard edges. I just wanted you to expand on that. And since we've had so many lectures, well, 2 lectures about the Antichrist, is it about we've lost this powerful narrative and now we've lost our way and a new narrative has come in to shape everything?
I think everything is relational. And if you compare the conviction displayed by the Islamists in terms of their faith in Islam and the foundational documents and the man who founded Islam, Muhammad, and you ask yourself, can we offset that with an alien creed that is coming in? We can't. We've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. We have said that it was possible after the Enlightenment to base our societies purely on concepts like secularism and liberalism. We've unwittingly then brought about generations that do not understand the moral foundations of their own societies. I was appalled last spring when I found students attending the highest educational institutions the West has to offer. This is the University of Harvard, the University of Penn, the University of Columbia, and it moved on to the University of Oxford and Cambridge. It's in these places where young people were openly supporting Hamas. That tells you that's a generation that is struggling with the effort to tell the difference between right and wrong. Now, for them, America is founded on, and then so is Britain and all these other countries. They borrowed, they established institutions that were inspired by Christianity and Christian morality in particular. And by rejecting Christianity, by debasing it, by mocking it, by kicking it out of the public space, I think we have deprived young people of their moral sources, and it's been a huge mistake. And we created a vacuum. And in that vacuum have come wokeism, social justice. You know, these are kids who really want to change the world and do good things. And that is, it's the progressives who are capitalizing on that. And when I say the progressives, I mean the woke in particular, because they've presented a new religion. And along, of course, with the Islamists, Islam is the fastest growing religion in the West. And that is because Christianity has been subdued, not by Muslims, but by Christians.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. My name is Ben. I've noticed an alarming rise of anti-Semitism, especially among conservatives and the far right. They like to point out that AIPAC owns our government, or that the state of Israel, the fact that we give them arms and support them so much in their wars against these terrible Arab states, that this means that we're being controlled by Jews. I just want to know, like, what's your general take on this? And is there a way to, like, stop this from happening, especially among the right?
To answer your question, let me illustrate it with my own. I was socialized into hating Jews. I used to hate them. I used to think they were monsters. I didn't think they looked human. So I was completely immersed. And this happened at home, and it happened in the mosque, and it happened at school, and so on. And then I came to the Netherlands. And fortunately for me, I attended the University of Leiden just as the Europeans were going through their reckoning of what they had done to their fellow Jewish citizens. And I thank that as my re-education. A few years later, when I went into Parliament in 2003, there were groups of Muslims who said they didn't want to be a part of this education on the Holocaust, the memorialization of what happened, this reckoning. They said they weren't a part of it. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. And the mistake country after country made was to say, well, in that case, it's not mandatory anymore. I think in Germany, officially, it's still mandatory, but it's outsourced to NGOs. And with that, I think, came a rise in, I don't know if you remember, you are too young to remember this, but some of the older people here will remember the nasty campaign against the canon as Western canon as white, male, and pale and stale. And Jesse Jackson shouting all over the place, Western Civ must go, ho, ho, yo, ho, whatever, Western Civ must go. Now, I think a consequence of that has been that there is now a generation that doesn't know what led up to the Holocaust, that are not educated, that these tropes, this scapegoating, this story, that these stupid narratives that Jews control the world, they don't see, they can't look at it critically because they haven't been taught, they haven't been exposed. And that is the generation after me. I was going to school in the 1990s up to the 2000s, and this politicization of the curriculum and this capture of the curriculum by the woke, along with some of the Islamists, that is occurring in the 2010s up to now. And so I think we're now seeing a generation that's come off with degrees in funny subjects like gender studies and Black studies and liberation studies and intersectionality and so on. And they can't tell the difference between right and wrong. And they believe in this nonsense. And it's dangerous nonsense.
I agree. Thank you.
So while there was an uptick in restoring Jewish identity since October 7th, the fear of representing ourselves through observance of our rituals or wearing a Magen David has pervaded. We often seek a safe haven in assimilation, and we're also afraid of calling out anti-Semitism for what it is. That dirtier word is often replaced with anti-Zionism or Holocaust denial. And so should we assume that this is another trend, maybe, like BLM, and not wait until the mainstream forgets anti-Semitism, or should we see this as a more permanent thing, and how do we respond?
That's a great question. And let me start with how you end by saying, please do not think that this is another fad that will pass. I think it would be a lethal mistake for all of us to do it, and especially for Jewish communities. It's not going to pass, number one. Number two, I understand and I listen and follow intensely conversations within Jewish communities where they say, well, at least now, as opposed to the 1930s, we have a home and we can go to Israel. And I think that that is A, giving up, and B, if you look at the scale and the scope and the intensity of the hatred that the Islamists have created, and not just Islamists, it used to be Muslim governments. The only difference is Islamists drive their followers to act, whereas the Muslim governments propagated the anti-Jewish propaganda in order to create, to keep their populations apathetic. But the intensity, the scale, and the scope of this hatred is something that you cannot underestimate. And it has shifted, as I said, it's imported now. It's no longer constrained to the Muslim countries of the past. It's here in America. It's all over the West. And it has resuscitated and given permission to the other anti-Semitisms, the European anti-Semitism, but don't forget the Soviet anti-Semitism. It's given permission to all of these anti-Semitisms to come back. And so I think now is the moment. It's one of the most serious, if not the most serious, problems that we are seeing. If we want to prevent another Holocaust from happening, we should not treat this as a fad. We should take it very, very seriously.
Thank you.
I have a very basic question, I think. Basically, what do we do about it? You alluded to it a little bit as far as like we need to do something different.
Yes.
But also you mentioned that it seems that what converted you was Holocaust education, or like seeing what the problems are kind of firsthand with anti-Semitism, the problems with anti-Semitism. And that seems like what the old approach was. So why isn't that effective, and what should we be doing?
If we reassess the old approach, we're going to find that there were things that actually worked. The mandatory education on the lead up to the Holocaust and how populations became complicit. In my classroom, some of my professors said, what we did to the Jews wasn't just to to annihilate them or to hurt them or to send them to camps. He said it debased us as human beings. It put us in a moral crisis of our own. And he was talking about all of Europe. I think in that sense, by reassessing it, we have to go back to say, who are we? What is our identity? Are we people who will repeat that one more time? Even if it happens in the name of Islam? No. So I think reassess what we did right, and then now look at what we have done and some of the effects and how it hasn't been helpful. I think part of these, say, cultural pluralism and multiculturalism, etc., these were philosophies that were actually developed in some ways to accommodate the differentness of like how Jews are distinct, so that they can, as a minority group, they can keep their rituals and their identity and still be a part of the wider society. And these philosophies were also applied to the Native Americans, maybe to a certain extent Black Americans, because multiculturalism comes with exemptions, and it comes with exceptions for the law and affirmative action and a whole constellation of things that at one time, before globalization, before mass immigration, before the challenge of Islamism, these things sounded and seemed to be good and effective and inclusive. That's not the case anymore. So we've got to throw that out. We've got to start understanding that now we can form alliances with the individuals, the organizations, even the nations that are alienated and are targeted by the Islamists. In Europe, for instance, it's the white working class that is hard-pressed by the upsurge in immigration, but also through Islamism. It's their neighborhoods, their schools, their social welfare benefits. These are large communities that are resisting that. And when they resist this, they're called far-right, they're called racist, they're called extremist. They're not. They're responding to the changes that are occurring in the same way that, say, some of the Jewish neighborhoods are responding. They're appalled, and anything they say, they're told they're Islamophobes. So I think part of it is reassessing that aspect of minority protection and understanding that the Islamists are abusing these kindnesses. This is why I said we only focus on terrorism and fighting terrorism, but terror is a tactic, and it's only one of many tactics of subversive warfare. And I think we should look at the real subversion, the language they use, the indoctrination, etc. So we have to wise up. We are behind them. Their use and abuse of propaganda, the development of the concept of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is presented as if it is exactly the same thing as anti-Semitism. We know the history of anti-Semitism in Europe that led to the Holocaust, but there's never been a Holocaust against Muslims. Islam is not an ethnicity. It is not, Muslims are made up of, they say 1.5 to 1.8 billion. And in fact, in some ways, they are a majority. And if you want to play with the numbers, in Europe, for every one Jew, there are 36 Muslims. So who's the minority here? And in the US, we're not that far behind. Right now, in the US, Jewish populations are more official, according to the official numbers, than Muslim numbers. But these numbers are changing because of more immigration, because of the birth rates that are asymmetrical. So I think we've got to wise up, and we've got to, and here's why it's so important to recapture these schools, the institutions of education. UATX, where I can come and give this talk. I can't give this talk in any other university in the United States without having people protest. And threaten. And finally, the final thing I want to say is, let's also consider the message. So we've been talking a lot about the medium, but the message of the Islamists, if you dig deep into it, it's a message of death. They shout, we believe in death, and you believe in life. So when you look at what Israel is fighting for, what the Jews are fighting for, it is life. And that message of life, That should be easier to sell, even to Muslims, than they are. But we're not competing because they applied the propaganda that if we dissect what they're saying and we share that with the larger public, we're committing Islamophobia. So we're engaged in self-censorship. And we've got to get rid of all of that.
Could I just ask a quick follow-up? So it seems that much of what you're saying is that multiculturalism is not working anymore. We need to not do that. But if we got rid of multiculturalism, where would the Jews be? Like, how would that work? And perhaps the answer is that it's multiculturalism for everyone except the Islamists, but that also doesn't sit quite right.
The condemnation of nationalism, when we were reckoning with the lead up to the Holocaust and reflecting on that time, there was that German nationalism of blood and soil, and the Jews were accused of racial impurity. That ethno-nationalism is bad and wrong, and we must continue to condemn that. But that can't be the only aspects of nationalism. There are very positive nationalisms where we have a constitution and the rule of law, and we are all equal before the rule of law, no exceptions, no exemptions. In the United Kingdom now, there is a sentencing committee that is determined to have crime, the exact same crime committed by different individuals. If you're of an ethnic minority, you're going to get leniency, but if you are a white heterosexual male, you're going to get the full extent of that punishment. That is taking a wrecking ball to the system, to the nation state. So what unifies us, what makes me an American? I love America. It's the Constitution. It's what I have in common with you. So I'll say, let's end multiculturalism, let's end diversity and all of that nonsense and insist on our unity as human beings as first, and the constitutions and laws that protect that.
So just to clarify, that would be like allowing Jewish culture to exist, but not using like DEI to raise it above other cultures, and not using DEI to raise any one culture above others, like we're currently doing to some extent.
I think what I'm trying to say is we are multi-ethnic, and we've got multiple identities, but our national identity is one, and it must be one, and it must be treated as one if it is to work. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all these cosmetic, artificial instruments, if you read the literature and the philosophies out of which they come, these are subversive efforts to dismantle the West and Western structures. We have a merit-based system. And if I just got offered an amazing job, I read through all of the points and I want it, but I came to the conclusion, I can't do it. I don't have the skill set. But I could get it if I only insisted I was black and I was woman and I was this and I was that. That's a DEI. And if you eliminate meritocracy, then what makes this society different from all the other corrupt societies where people get to the top because of who they're related to and who they know and who their blood ties are with? And a society that decides to go down that path of giving positions of power and privilege and so on according to identity, that's a society that's going to not last for long. We wouldn't be able to compete with China. We wouldn't be able to compete with other countries, I'm afraid. So I think maybe we should say, let's learn from Israel. Israel as a nation state, I think it was Dan Senor who wrote that book, Startup Nation. That startup nation is flourishing. I was impressed. I was there last week on Tuesday, and I was impressed by, it was nearly midnight when I came from the airport, and there were young women walking the streets, alone, sometimes in pairs, sometimes more, almost at midnight in Jerusalem. And I remarked on it. I asked the driver, how is that possible? And he said, in Israel, women can walk the streets any time of night or day unaccompanied. They have nothing to fear. That is a nation state that honors the social contract between those who govern and those who are governed. Because the most important function of a government is to keep her citizens safe. And now in Europe and in America, sadly, girls are not safe. And Jews, I just told you, I mean, they're saying there's this impending doom. Our Jewish fellow citizens don't feel safe. That social contract is broken, and we better repair it quickly.
Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to say I loved your jacket, and I also wanted to ask,
Thank you.
are there any lessons from your recent conversion to Christianity that might be applied to the West and the absence of Judeo-Christian values, and how might any lessons there help us combat anti-Semitism?
I get a lot of questions about my conversion to Christianity, and I always think, what if I didn't even exist, let alone convert to Christianity? And I want to insist that the revival of Christianity, as in the teachings of Jesus Christ, the Sermon on the Mount, that those moral imperatives are what the West is built on. And I think it's very important that we revive those, especially for young people. I think the boomers, sorry if there are any boomers here, my criticism of the boomer generation is that they enjoyed the institutions that their forefathers fought for and died for, and then squandered it. And so I think we need a new generation now to revisit those principles and bring them back for the young.
And if I might ask a brief follow-up, as a former flag bearer for the New Atheist movement, and as someone who's converted away from Islam, it seems like you are uniquely positioned to address this inflection point, given that, as outlined in your talk, it's these two forces in league with each other that are pushing anti-Semitism forward. So is there anything specifically in your conversion that we can all learn from?
What brought me to Christianity was I was brought low. It was a sense of humility. And one of my big beefs with my fellow atheists back then was we nurtured a sense of great arrogance. We thought we knew everything, and we had a disdain for people who believed and a disdain for the biblical legacy. And we thought that history started, let me speak for myself, history started with the Enlightenment. And I have come to realize that put your humble foot first before you condemn the principles and beliefs of others.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to reiterate the thanks for your time here at the University of Austin. What I wanted to ask you was, you speak of Islamophobia and classes like Black Studies as phony ideological things, but I was curious as to what makes them different. What makes white supremacy different, or like Islamophobia so different from anti-Semitism, as there, we did import many African slaves that died in the millions, and so did South American countries even more so. We did force Native Americans on forced marches and genocide. There are Muslims being massacred in China today. So what makes anti-Semitism so different?
Two things. One is we have reckoned in America and in Western European countries, we've had a great reckoning with our past. We've addressed the fact that we engaged in slavery, we fought a war, we ended it. We had segregation, we had another major fight, we ended it. We had the civil rights movement. We brought women out of, and by the way, in fighting for all of those emancipations, the people who were heading these fights were constantly quoting from the Bible. They were believing Christians and they were inspired by their Christianity. So number one, we had that reckoning. Number two, anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred in humanity, and you find it, believe it or not, across the entire world. What made the West different after they nearly exterminated their Jews was to have that honest look in the mirror and reckon with what they did. And then those campaigns to end it. Islamophobia is a made-up word. It's made up by a political movement that wants to exploit and capitalize on white guilt to achieve its end goal, which is the revival of the caliphate. And the revival of the caliphate is to convert all of us into Islam, whether we like it or not. Those of us who refuse to do that, we will surely be beheaded. I'm sure I'm on top. And that is their end goal. And so they're exploiting these Western part of subversion. This is just a guest speech, but I wish that at some point someone here could start a lecture series on subversion, on active measures, on asymmetric warfare. That would get you interested in what it is that the Islamists are doing and how they've become so successful against these great nations with this incredible military and economic structures, and yet the Islamists are winning. Islam is spreading. They're doing better today than they were doing in 2001 after they hit us and we invaded Afghanistan. They've got Afghanistan back. They have Iraq back. They have Syria. And these Muslim governments are they're shaking in their boots. They're worried about what could happen to them because of the Islamist movement, and that's why the Islamist movement came here. And they're exploiting principles like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association, and so on. And of course, these progressive movements that we have here, we've got to understand that, and we've got to become really creative in finding a way of preserving our principles. I don't want to give up on the freedom of speech, but on the other hand, on beating the Islamists at their game.
Is there room for compromise between principles?
If I want to kill you and behead you, unless you convert to the religion I dictate, what would be the place of compromise?
Well, I would not mind converting, as I myself am an agnostic, so have no faith, have no established faith. However, I understand that some people would not share that vision. So,
let's play with this thought for a while. There's a time and a place for everything, and for some of the people, say in places like Africa, we don't talk about this, but Islamists are active in Africa and violently so. If you're a Christian in Egypt or a Hindu in parts of Pakistan, and you have someone looking at you and saying, you'll either lose your head or you convert to Islam, it makes sense to consider converting to Islam. But here today, for us to have the attitude of, well, we'll see what happens, and if we get to that point, I'll just convert, I will say, are you sure? Maybe you want to get educated on what would happen once you convert. What would your life be like, and the life of your sisters and women? What would they do to the Jews? He has said, this man, I repeat it, he said they're bacteria and they're microbes. And in the video that I showed you, they made it very clear it has nothing to do with Palestine. It has everything to do with them being Jewish. So they are going to annihilate the Jews. Will you stand by and watch that? Maybe I should give Introduction to Islam and Islamism as a lecture series, and once you understand what it's all about, you might develop a backbone.
I would look forward to that greatly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Theo already started my question, but my question is inspired by what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount about blessed are the peacemakers. So we see in human nature a desire to scapegoat, right? And you're arguing that the Jews are being, there's a movement, or there's something that is trying to present Jews as the scapegoat, right? You talk about two important forces, maybe the Islam nation state, which is like a political power, which is a threat, but then also this, like, you talk about this network, like mosques all over the place, and these, communities, and all, it's infiltrating America and the West. So if we don't want to fall into our natural tendency to scapegoat and just become and instead of moving from anti-Semitism to anti-Islamicism, and our goal is to be peacemakers, then how do we do that? But at the end of your last question, you framed it as a violent struggle, right? If it's a violent struggle, then who is our enemies and what do we do?
Right after 9/11, you were probably not born. How old were you on 9/11?
I was born in 2004.
2004, so before you. So right after 9/11, 2001, when we were having these discussions about how to treat this enemy that wasn't a state, but that was determined to destroy us, some of the discussions were, but we can't do this because of the Constitution. We can't do that because of the Constitution. We can't do this because... And a very frustrated judge or Justice Posner said, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. So I don't think there is a lot of space between committing suicide and doing what the young man here said, is to let it just all happen. And I mean, when the time comes, I guess we will convert or we'll deal with it, whatever. And really looking at and studying openly, which we haven't been able to do because we've been self-censoring, and I gave you that list of all the different ways in which we underestimated the Islamist movement. But if we were to estimate it the right way, I will say in our history in America, it's not the first time that we are fighting an ideology that wants to destroy us. Communism, just the other day, not so long ago, most of us lived through it. And you call it a Cold War here, but in Africa and in other parts of the world, it wasn't cold, it was hot. And we starved and all of it. So there were very good reasons for the United States and Western countries to fight the ideology of communism. And they developed a number of, I'd say, tools to recognize it when it's applying internal subversive methods and when it's coming from an external position. And we can reapply those, but we do have to identify Islamism and Islamists as the enemy that they are and give them the full respect. You asked me to identify and you asked me to define what is an enemy. It's a force that wants to destroy you. How do I know that? In this infrastructure of mosques and madrasas and Islamic centers, etc., they say it explicitly. So there is something about don't listen to me, don't listen to the analysts with PhDs and the like. Listen to them and what they say and take it at their word.
So does this come down to a like propaganda war? Like we just inculcate our children before they do? Is that where the battle lies?
I think because the war they wage is totalitarian and total.
But ours,
And
where do we
ours,
meet them?
well, we have to meet, ours has to be total too. It has to be where they fight us with ideas, we fight them with ideas. Where they fight us with subversive means, we recognize that and we dismantle this infrastructure and kick them out of the country. We have those tools, we have these possibilities. We can't just let them spread. And this, again, we did the same to communists. We watched as communists grew and as they were subverting our societies, and we took the appropriate measures against individuals, against groups, and so on, but always with due process and always within the limits of the Constitution. But we can't, again, I repeat, the Constitution is not a suicidal pact.
Hi. So how do we educate against totalitarianism in general? And how do we educate people against like this victimhood mentality, which we see in broader terms? And how do we get to find more people like you? Like, can we re-educate more people, and how could we do that?
Through citizenship, through responsibility, we give individuals responsibility. We should hold individuals accountable. If you want to bring about an Islamist nation here, and if you're shouting from the rooftops that America should become Islamic, we should be able, through education, through schools and the media and every other form of communication, teach young people and older people what exactly that would look like. So one of the problems I've had since I joined this debate after 9/11, 2001, was we are not allowed to talk about what the Islamists want in mainstream media. When they attain power, what are they going to do? Well, look at the Taliban in Afghanistan. The country that I was born in, Somalia, we have a group there related to Al-Qaeda, born out of the Muslim Brotherhood. As soon as they came, got this amount of power, they started amputating people's hands, they started cutting people's throats off, they started stoning women for adultery, and on and on. We've got to be able to show in the universities and the schools and in our media, if you think you're going to be seduced by this idea, this is what it looks like. Islam is one of the fastest growing religions in Europe and in America, and they're growing also by converting people. The Hispanic population, apparently in Houston, is converting to Islam, but no one has told that population what it really means to be part of that, to join that religion, what it is that the religion says. We engage in self-censorship and impoliteness, paradoxically, because we were bad to our Jewish minority. I remember a Jewish mayor in Amsterdam in the early days when we were talking about assimilating, developing programs to assimilate Muslim communities into Holland. He kept insisting to me, but we don't want to do to the Muslim minorities what we did to the Jews. And that became the excuse to do nothing. That can't be right.
A word from the baby boomer corner. Your books changed my life. The last 20 years I have spent fighting the battles that you fight. I used to teach law in California, and hundreds of students demonstrated against me as a hate speaker when I only was having the debate that we have to have in our culture to know what the values are that we're defending, that we're presenting, and what we're being challenged with. I have stood here in Texas in a convention hall with thousands of other lawyers who wanted to laugh when I mentioned that there was a Sharia arbitration tribunal operating. Within the last few years, I've written an amicus brief with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser and a lot of the good American Muslims to explain to our Supreme Court that Muslim marriages under Sharia are being performed in the state of Texas. I've seen the marriage certificates, but people do not want to believe it. I have attorney and judge friends all over Europe who warn me, because of the political influence of Islam in Europe, that if America doesn't stand up and explain in the terms that our culture understands, and this will be up to you younger people, it is difficult when your job is threatened, when all you're doing is saying the First Amendment is what we stand on. And I am defending the Ayaan Hirsi Alis and the Dr. Zuhdi Jassers and Azra Nomani and Kanta Ahmed, brilliant Muslim Westerners who are feared, they fear that they will be silenced in our country because we're not defending our own First Amendment and our own cultural values. So thank you.
Karen, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you very, very much. I would advise state legislatures, especially in Texas, come and take a look at Britain, Germany, Sweden. Come and see what has happened to these neighborhoods. In 1992, when I was there, it was a different world. It was a completely different planet almost. And now you see some of these scenes and you think, I'm looking at this footage. Is this Manchester and Birmingham, or is this Lahore and Cairo, or some kind of slum? And this is happening. So, I mean, in America, because we have a vast ocean between us and the rest of the world, we take a few things for granted, and we shouldn't wait until we get to the place where Europe is. And Europe, some of these countries are on the brink of civil war. And maybe when we see what they're doing, they've got hate laws all over the place. Hate laws were apparently legislation to fight anti-Semitism. That is one of the things I'm saying, let's let's knock it off, bring about free speech so that people can openly discuss what is going on in their neighborhoods and what's going on in these schools and what they're teaching these young people. The young people are being indoctrinated with the ideology of the men you saw here. And it's happening in these European countries. It's happening in America. So get young people to come, to travel and come and look at these places. And then decide for yourself whether you will wait for them to give you the option or whether you will stand up and fight for what we have. Thank you.